There's been a lot more weird shit going on, even shit going on in the ocean.
Ooh, the ocean?
In China and in Asia, right? There's these fish called oarfish. She's like 11 feet long ass fish, bro. But they only come out when something terrible is gonna happen.
Oh my gosh.
There's mythology behind them that whenever they see them, they're called the doomsday fish. And they're saying like, yo, they're either running from something or they're trying to warn us. Because they live 1,000 to 2,000 feet below sea level. They came out before in 2011 in Fukushima when they had the nuclear plant like went crazy. They had a tsunami.
Okay.
They had a tsunami and an earthquake. And then in 2019, there was a big ass blackout. And then they had one of the worst earthquakes
ever
in history, bro. And now recently, a lot of like biologists and like divers and shit are seeing more and more
of oarfish?
Oarfish coming about, bro. Like, bro, we're already desensitized to it. Think about it. Me and my brother, right? We were talking about, we're like, yo, they just confirmed.
What you're about to see is the last video ever taken of 31-year-old Paola Miranda before she mysteriously disappeared. Paola was reported missing on December 17, 2021 after visiting family in Orlando, Florida. The next day, she was spotted by hikers wading in the Wikiva River, and it was there that they captured that final video of her. She then disappeared and has never been seen again. 3 days later, Paola's car was found at the Wikiwa Springs State Park with her phone and keys still inside. Authorities have since searched by boat, plane, drones, cadaver dogs, and have even used an underwater camera system, but no trace of Paola has ever been found. According to FloridaStateParks.org, swimming in the Wikiva River is not permitted, and I'm assuming that's because there are likely alligators and other dangerous animals there. I'm wondering if that's why the hikers recorded Paola that day. Her family confirmed that she struggled with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, which could have confused her and caused her to become lost that day, but they don't know if that played a factor in her disappearance. At this point, her family just wants her story to continue being told because she could be anywhere, and according to them, they fear that she could have also possibly been trafficked. So they have reached out to the FBI to investigate. If you have any information regarding Paola's disappearance, please call the number on the screen.
This woman went on a 10-day vacation and left her baby home to die.
This case is absolutely gut-turning, so this is a massive trigger warning. Crystal Cantelario is a 32-year-old woman from Ohio, and she worked as a substitute teacher at an elementary school, which makes this case even more disturbing after knowing that she works with children. And like many other people, she decided to go on a vacation during the summer months. And on June 6th, she went on a trip to the Caribbean and left her home in Cleveland, Ohio. But the only issue was she did not seem to care that she was leaving her 16-month-old baby behind alone. Her baby girl was named Jalen, and Crystal did not come home until 10 days later. And when she got back, she discovered her child was unresponsive. And when paramedics arrived at the scene, they sadly pronounced the child dead. The baby was extremely dehydrated, and she was found in a playpen, in blankets that were completely dirty. Crystal was then arrested and charged with her daughter's murder. She was fired from her job and pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated murder, and 1 count of endangering children. She is due to be sentenced soon, and if convicted of aggravated murder, she will get life in prison. This case is absolutely gut-turning because what in the world does she think would happen if she left her 16-month-old baby alone for 10 days? The baby obviously couldn't take care of itself and would slowly just die, which is exactly what happened. I don't know what could be going through someone's head to do this to their own daughter, and I wish Crystal nothing but the worst. Rest in peace to Jalen, you did not deserve this at all.
Thank God this man is going to prison. This is 28-year-old Dion Williams from Houston, Texas. He looks a bit older than 28, but what am I to say? Dion was arrested last year after a mother in Houston went to the police and said that her 11-year-old daughter was pregnant. You heard that correctly, 11-year-old daughter. So, as it turns out, Dion was a friend of the young girl's mother. They had known each other for a while, they were pretty close, and Dion spent the night at the family's house a number of times. On multiple of those occasions, however, Dion, late at night when everyone was asleep, snuck into the 11-year-old girl's bedroom, where he would then assault her repeatedly in many different ways. And afterwards, he would tell the 11-year-old girl that if she ever told anybody, he would kill her and her entire family. Well, sadly, at one point, that 11-year-old girl started getting morning sickness, and she was showing visible signs of pregnancy, so her mother, very concerned, brought her into a doctor and found out that, yes, she was pregnant. DNA tests were then performed and Dion was the perpetrator. So, thankfully, in the United States and in other countries, we really don't see that harsh of sentences for pedophiles. But in this case, Dion is going to be spending 40 years in prison with no chance to appeal. That means that Dion threw his entire life away, and he's going to be almost 70 years old when he gets out of prison, if he even makes it that far. As we all know, pedophiles don't really get the best treatment in prisons. But yeah, we don't really see sentences this long in the United States. If this was up to me, I would lock this dude up for life and throw away the key. But, like I said before, this is a step in the right direction because 40 years is a very, very long time. And I really do hope that everybody in prison knows who this man is and what he did on the outside.
This woman thought she was safe to reject her colleagues' advances. She wouldn't make it to her next shift alive. It was 2022 in Minnesota. Nicole Hammond was a beautiful young woman who enjoyed hiking, photography, and traveling. She'd even started her own jewelry business and had her whole life ahead of her when tragedy struck. The 28-year-old worked alongside a man called Michael Jordan Carpenter, who was 10 years older than her. Michael had a crush on Nicole and made his feelings known. He actually repeatedly made advances towards Nicole at work, and she felt incredibly uncomfortable about this. Numerous times he made a pass at her and she had to repeatedly tell him she was not interested. Now, it's believed that multiple colleagues knew about his harassment of Nicole, but higher management did not know. On the evening before the day in question, Michael and Nicole had exchanged text messages. Nicole told him outright that she did not want to be touched by him or manipulated by him. The pair had got into an argument. The following day, something absolutely horrific happened prior to Nicole's shift at work. Michael approached her in a car park with a pistol. He took it out and then shot her in the neck. Now, Michael fled the scene and was actually arrested about 3 hours later. Sadly, Nicole did not make it. He has just recently been sentenced to life in prison.
Very disturbing audio of a serial killer talking to Howard Stern.
Isn't that the radio guy? He has like
Yeah.
long hair?
Yeah, so they just have this segment where people call in and share their story, right? But this specific morning, August 13th, 1997, somebody called in by the name of Clay, claiming that he was a serial killer.
Is this Ed?
No, this isn't Ed.
Oh.
You haven't killed any prostitutes?
No, I never said my name was Ed.
Oh.
What name do you use?
You can call me Clay.
Okay, Clay. So what happened? How many prostitutes have you killed?
12.
And you're wondering why you do it?
I have a pretty good idea.
Why? Did your mom beat you? Did your mom spank you?
Was your mom a prostitute?
No. Actually, nothing like that.
What is it then?
I think I just do it for the sense of the power.
Right.
What are you? You beat them to death with a hammer?
Man.
It usually only takes once, and
Dude, you got to have a lot of anger in you.
yes.
And you get away with it, I guess, because they're hookers, and so far nobody's... What?
Is this Howard?
Yeah.
They believe that this Clay, mysterious person, was connected to the Storyville Slayer. It was a person who killed prostitutes in the Louisiana area and stuff like that. Also saying that it was connected to some other guy, Russell Elwood. But they never really linked both of them, and it was never a...
Nobody knows who the fuck that guy
Nobody
was?
knows who Clay is. Nobody knows who that was that called on the phone and if he was ever caught.
Damn.
This is by far the most disturbing book in the world, and you should never want to read it.
The book is called Al-Azif, and it talks about black magic in the ancient civilizations that lived on Earth millions of years ago before humans ever existed. And they were satanic civilizations, meaning that before humans, there were jinns living on Earth, which is mentioned in the Quran. The jinns used to live before Adam and Eve, and this book tells you about those satanic civilizations, and what's even more scary and dangerous is that the book tells you how to communicate with these creatures, which is just disturbing, and it is known that the average age of the jinn is 5,000 years. All copies of the Al-Azif in the world, and many of them translated in different languages, were burned completely, and there is only one copy of the book on Earth, and it's located in the Vatican Library. And nobody can reach this copy without a specific and secret permit. The author of the Al-Azif is Abdullah al-Hajred, and he was a Yemeni poet and was born in 685 and passed away in 735. All the people around him called him the crazy poet or the crazy Arab man. And apparently he used the magic from the jinns he learned from the book in a very bad way. And he was then punished with a terrible punishment by the jinns. They sent a creature that cut off his private parts and took the rest of his body and immediately disappeared. So yeah, I don't know about you, but I never want to read this book.
Imagine coming home to find your mum screaming in the garden. Stood over her is your dad with a knife. Violetta Morawski lived with her husband, Rysard, aged 44. The pair had a family home located in Suffolk County, New York, and had 2 teenage sons. On the 3rd of January this year, the world was turned upside down for the couple's children when the 15-year-old returned home. He could hear screaming coming from the back garden. When he approached the scene, he realized that the cries were coming from his mother. As he got closer, he had the horrific realization that his dad was stabbing her. As his dad held a huge serrated knife, the brave boy jumped onto him and wrestled him off. His mum was able to scramble across the road. The boy then found a phone and called 911, begging officers to hurry. Violetta then collapsed from her injuries as her son tried to save her life. Tragically, she didn't stand a chance. Although she was rushed to hospital, she was pronounced dead when she got there. Meanwhile, her husband had fled in a truck. After being pursued by officers and a tense chase, he finally lost control of the car and crashed into a brick wall. He was then able to be arrested and is pleading guilty to the killing. Violetta is remembered by loved ones as a wonderful woman, an amazing friend who touched the lives of many. She was completely selfless and reportedly would do anything for anyone. While we don't know the motive for this hideous crime, it's being called, quote, a tragic case of domestic violence. Rysard faces 22 years to life in prison.
I want you to take a look at this website. Do you notice anything disturbing? Oh yeah, maybe this giant sign on the side? Well, the owners and operators of this website were arrested in Japan in 2014 because they were running a CP sales website. Now, if you didn't know this, CP and CSAM was legal to own in Japan until the year 2014. So when that law was passed, thousands of pedophiles contacted the police themselves and asked if they're going to get arrested or get into any trouble, especially after the police in Japan busted this website. These documents contain the names and information of every pedophile that ever made a purchase on that website. And according to lawyers and investigators that were on this case, these clients included school teachers, grade school teachers, medical practitioners, doctors, and even prominent individuals in local communities. But this website was opened in 2018, 4 years after Japan outlawed the possession of this stuff. And even though they tried to put this stupid little warning, it didn't work. Pedophiles were literally posting all of these videos and photos on this website for other pedophiles, and they were able to set their own price. So this was literally like Amazon Prime for pedophiles. And these forums and these websites are so incredibly disturbing. I've talked about them in depth here on TikTok. I'll let you pause to read some of these screenshots if you do. These are from other CP websites and forums. But the stuff that these people talk about under the mask of anonymity is disturbing and disgusting. And I'm glad that one website got shut down. But the scary thought is how many thousands of other websites exactly like this one are up and running right now in 2024. If you want to join me on my journey to expose pedophile rings and corruption, listen to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files. It's available on all streaming platforms, or you can watch the video version where we do deep dives here. And if you haven't seen this video, I cannot recommend it enough. This will change your perspective on the world.
Imagine getting murdered and your killer attends your funeral. This is the case of Claire Tiltman that stunned Dartford. It was January 1993 in Greenhithe in Kent. Claire Tiltman was 16 years old and was in Year 11 at Dartford Grammar School. She was a very charismatic girl and was really well liked. It was a dark evening at around 7 p.m. on the 13th of the month. A man named Michael Godfrey was driving along the road with his colleague Ron. Suddenly he was startled by a woman collapsed at the side of the road. She looked like she was in pain, so he pulled the car over and immediately ran over to help her. Ron also ran to a nearby pub to call for help, and Michael tried to speak to the girl, but she was really struggling to breathe. That's when he noticed she was covered in blood. He did try and give her CPR, but unfortunately she had no chance. Her wounds were so severe that she passed away at the side of the road. Officers knew they needed to work out who had committed such a savage murder. Now they figured out that Claire had actually been to a corner shop and then made her way down a busy road. She then took a shortcut through down past some houses. It was there that she was ambushed in an alleyway. Officers had very little to go off. They didn't have any forensics and any eyewitnesses. They decided to trawl back through their previous case files. In 1988, there'd been a harrowing similar incident in which a man had taken a female from her home, AR'd her, and then stabbed her before leaving her for dead. This occurred very near to where Claire was then murdered 5 years later. They started wondering whether the two attacks were linked. As officers delved further into the investigation, Claire's grief-stricken family attended her funeral. Chillingly, her mum told people that she had a weird feeling that the killer was in attendance at the funeral, and she would be correct. Unfortunately, 2 years after Claire's murder, there was still no justice, and then there was a similar attack. Again, it was a young girl who'd been walking in the area, but miraculously she managed to play dead and therefore survived. An eyewitness at the time had spotted the local milkman's car in the area. The owner of the car was 24-year-old Colin Ash Smith. His home was searched and police found a knife. They soon identified that this was the exact knife that had been used in the most recent stabbing. They then also found his secret diary. Now, this documented details of the 1988 stabbing. Colin had also used his diary to document plans to murder people in a care home. When police confronted him with the evidence, he did admit to both non-fatal stabbings. However, really strangely, Claire's murder wasn't documented in the journal. Colin's mum also gave him an alibi for the night of that murder. Claire's family wouldn't get justice for her for 21 years. Sadly, Claire's parents actually passed away without ever seeing anyone brought to justice for their daughter's murder. Then finally, while Colin was in prison, there was a breakthrough. He actually revealed to another prisoner some information about Claire's killing that only the police and the killer would have known. He was finally able to be charged with murder. It turned out that his alibi was false and his mum had lied. Colin's dad had even disposed of his murder weapon. His dad was given 12 months in prison for perverting the course of justice, and Colin was given life in prison.
This is a video with a disturbing background. There was security footage at a church in Midlothian, Texas that showed an unknown individual that was roaming the building dressed in police tactical gear, and he was holding a hammer. It looked like he wasn't really trying to vandalize the church or steal anything. It looked like he was waiting for somebody. Like he was just trying to pass time. He, in fact, was waiting for somebody to arrive at the church. He ended up killing a woman named Missy Beavers, and she was a fitness instructor. She worked at this like fitness boot camp at her local church. And the day before, there was this weather broadcast saying how there's gonna be a massive storm the next day, specifically in the morning, and to keep a lookout. And that day, many people were like messaging her, calling her, saying if the class that morning was gonna be canceled because of the rainstorm.
Yeah.
It got to the point where like she ended up making a public post saying no excuses, we're gladiators, see you guys tomorrow, not knowing that that guy was inside building waiting for her and proceeds to beat her with the hammer. And then they thought they'd be able to capture whoever the fuck did this, because in the video the guy has like a specific limp and they walk with like their feet outwards like this, but still to this day nobody knows
Who that mysterious killer is?
Yes, there's people saying how maybe
Imagine finding a cursed stone and summoning a demon who says you must now carry out 3 human sacrifices or else the world will end. Picture this. The year is 1979 and you work as a quiet shoe salesman. Your boss and all of your coworkers make racist remarks and make you eat your lunch in the basement of the old building because it is too smelly. But once you're down there, you discover a cursed stone, and without knowing its significance, you take it home. You cut yourself and accidentally get your blood on said stone, and by doing so, you summon a demon named Gap, who in his real form is this terrifying devil-like creature. Gap tells you that you now must kill 3 people before Mayday or else the world will end. You're not so sure this is real at first, as you're struggling with the loss of your late mom and think that this must all be some kind of dream. But Gap shows you a glimpse of the apocalypse to come, and if he doesn't help you execute 3 people, he will never earn his wings in hell and will therefore be cast out into eternal nothingness. Now realizing that you are a pawn in a demonic game, you agree to kill 3 people, with the first being a man walking his dog at a nearby canal. After Gap shows you a vision of this man sexually abusing his daughter every night, you bludgeon him to death with a brick. If you hadn't killed him, his daughter would have grown up to end her own life because of the abuse. So you justify your actions and now commit to only killing bad people, because surely they deserve it, right? But even so, you grapple with your violent actions and try to hide what you're seeing from everyone you encounter, all while laying low from the police who are now investigating these grisly murders. Before you can make your final sacrifice, you're arrested, preventing you from doing so. And as the clock strikes midnight, the world as we knew it ends. This is called Demon 79, and it's the 5th episode of Season 6 of Black Mirror. I loved this because it poses a question that many ponder. Most people are inherently good, but with a little temptation and under the right circumstances, can anyone be persuaded to commit murder?
Pedophiles are everywhere. This guy was a psychiatrist seeing patients, and he was secretly one of the world's worst pedophiles. This guy's name is Kabir Garg. Kabir was arrested in November of 2022 after investigators found something horrific. As it turned out, Kabir had been a moderator on a dark web website for pedophiles, meaning that he wasn't just a pedophile that was going on there to enjoy the videos and photos. He was going on there to do that, but also to coach other pedophiles on how to abuse children. Keep in mind that this was at the same time that he was a psychiatrist supposedly helping other people with their mental health issues. When it turned out this guy was the most fucked up, twisted one of all. So when Kabir was arrested, the National Crime Agency did a search of his laptop and an SD card. In total, they found over 7,000 images and videos depicting CP or CSAM. And of those images, 522 of them fell into Category A. That is the worst category that an image or video can be put into, meaning it is extremely violent, it is extremely disturbing, and these children could be as young as babies, months, days, weeks old. So when investigators looked through this guy's devices, they found something crazy. On his devices, they found medical journals and articles talking about the impact, the psychological impact of sexual abuse on children. So this guy was participating in the essay of children, and at the same time, he was studying it in his free time. But they used this in court to show that this guy actually knew exactly what he was doing, and that he understood the impact that these horrific actions would have on the lives of children. This guy is definitely a monster. Sadly though, even though this guy was found guilty of possessing these images and videos, of creating them, disseminating them, and it was well known that this guy's a hardcore pedophile, he only got a 6-year sentence. I mean, this dude is young enough. He was only 33 years old when this happened. This means that before he's 40, he'll be back out on the street. And if that doesn't piss you off, I do not know what would. If you want to join me on my journey to expose pedophiles and corruption, listen to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Or you can subscribe to my channel where I do a video version of the podcast. This sort of corruption and these crimes have gone on for so long. It's time that we stand up together, learn about what's been happening, and try to stop it from happening again.
This young man was folded and stuck in a chimney, and this is one of the worst deaths imaginable explained. On May 8th, 2008 in Colorado, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox. On this day, he went for a walk, and walking through the woods was one of his favorite things to do. Except this time, he would sadly never come home, and nobody would ever see him alive again. The family filed a missing persons report, but given that he was 18 and a very adventurous person, they thought it was highly possible that he could have just picked up all of his things and moved. But it would have been very out of character for him to just leave and not say anything to his family. Fast forward 7 years later to August 2015. A property manager named Chuck Murphy was beginning the demolishing process of some cabins, and they have been abandoned for at least a decade. They were in the process of demolishing a chimney in one of the cabins, and they would find something truly disturbing that they never would have expected. Inside the chimney was a mummified human body. Dental records would then confirm that it was sadly the body of Joshua Maddox. The cabin was only a mile or two from where he lived, but this is where the story gets extremely weird. Josh was naked from the waist down and had a thin thermal shirt on, but absolutely nothing else. He was found upside down in a fetal position, his legs were above his head, and he was virtually folded in half. Based on the position he was in, they speculated that he had to go in from the top of the chimney head first. But why in the hell would anybody go into a chimney head first? Also, the chimney had a wired mesh top. Now, it was already demolished by the time they discovered the body, but the contractor swears it was there. So, how in the world did Josh get in from the top? Also, his clothes, the rest of them, were folded very neatly inside of the cabin next to the chimney, suggesting that he was already in the cabin, so what was his cause of death? They can't say for sure, but he had no physical trauma to his body at all. The coroner also said that he was likely in the chimney in that position for at least a couple of days, completely alive, and he would have either died from dehydration, which could have taken up to a week, or possibly, but likely, hypothermia, which could have taken a couple of days. Another theory, witnesses claim they saw him with a man named Andrew Newman before his disappearance and a man who is now in prison for murder. But how would one person get Josh halfway up a chimney? Again, there was no physical trauma at all, and why was he half naked? This case is absolutely mind-blowing, and what the hell happened to Joshua Maddox?
She disappeared twice during a dissociative fugue state, only to go missing for a third time, never to be seen again. This is the disturbing case of Hannah Upp, a woman who disappeared 3 times. In September of 2008, 23-year-old Hannah Upp was working as a Spanish teacher in New York City. Just a few days before the school year started, Hannah left her apartment to go for a run, but she never returned. She was quickly reported missing and her face was plastered everywhere. She was in every newspaper that you could possibly think of, and there were thousands of missing person flyers hung around the city. Authorities searched her apartment and found that she left behind her wallet, passport, MetroCard, phone, and purse. And after a massive search for her turned up nothing, Hannah was the true definition of disappearing into thin air. But then, 2 weeks later, Hannah was seen on security footage from an Apple store in Midtown Manhattan. She was wearing a sports bra and running shorts, and she had her hair up in a bun, which is exactly what she looked like when she went missing. She was seen on camera walking into the store, and then she used one of the display computers to check her Gmail account. Since her disappearance was so publicized, a man in the store immediately recognized her. But when he asked her if she was Hannah Upp, Hannah said no and that she was fine. 2 days later, she was seen once again at a Starbucks in Soho, but she left before police could arrive. Nearly 3 weeks would go by before a break in this case would come, but it would only bring more questions. One morning, a captain on a ferry spotted a body floating face down in the New York harbor. They were able to hoist the body up and found that it was Hannah, and she was somehow alive. Hannah took a sharp gasp of breath and began crying, and she was then taken to the hospital where she was treated for hypothermia, dehydration, and severe sunburn. During an interview, Hannah stated that she had no recollection of what happened during the last 3 weeks. She said she went from going on a run to being in an ambulance, and that it was like 10 minutes had passed, when in reality it had been 3 weeks. While she was in the hospital one night, she woke up and yelled, quote, "I was in a lighthouse." But when she was questioned about this the next morning, again she had no recollection. After this, Hannah was diagnosed with a rare condition called dissociative fugue, which is a temporary state in which a person has amnesia and ends up in an unexpected place. It can be triggered by a lot of things like trauma and natural disasters, and a person who suffers from this can wander off for months or even years at a time, sometimes even assuming new identities. Hannah tried to return to her normal life, but she would disappear under the same fugue state just a few years later. In September of 2013, Hannah was working as a teacher's assistant in Maryland when she suddenly went missing again. Her backpack and belongings were found on a trail, and much like her first disappearance, she seemed to have vanished into thin air. But 2 days later, she regained consciousness, and she woke up in a creek surrounded by water. Hannah once again had no recollection of what happened over the last 2 days, and she had no idea how she ended up in that creek. After this, Hannah moved to the Pillsbury Heights neighborhood of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. By September of 2017, life was going well for her as a teacher at a local Montessori school, and she lived with a couple of roommates. But as many of you know, around this time is when Hurricane Irma hit, which was then quickly followed by Hurricane Maria. Thousands of people died between the two, and the islands were completely decimated. Hannah was last seen on the morning of September 14th, 2017, leaving her apartment on the East End. The only clue left behind was a note that she had left for her roommate stating that she was going for a morning swim at the nearby Sapphire Beach and then going to school to do some work. But Hannah never came back, and when she didn't show up for a meeting the next day at her school, she was reported missing. Because of the destruction of Hurricane Irma, nobody had cell service or Wi-Fi, and searching for a missing person at this time was straight chaos. Almost everyone was hunkered down inside and debris was everywhere. But a few days later, Hannah's car was found by a construction cleanup crew at Sapphire Beach. Inside the car were all of her personal belongings, including her ID, credit cards, passport, phone, and all of her money. Her keys, sandals, and a skirt of hers were then found down by the beach. Authorities searched by land and air and deployed 3 helicopters to see what they could find. They even searched for her in homeless shelters, hospitals, and morgues, but after 2 days they had to stand down because of Hurricane Maria. To this day, Hannah has never been found, but there have been a few theories as to what could have happened to her. One theory believed by investigators is that Hannah went for a swim that morning and never made it out of the water. There were some employees at a nearby bar who saw her acting strange, so it's believed that Hannah went into another dissociative dissociative fugue state and then went into the water. At the time, the ocean had a really strong current with high waves because of the hurricanes, so it was really dangerous for anyone to go swimming. Hannah loved to swim, and she was often known to go swimming for miles at a time, so there was initially a theory that she could have possibly been swept out to an abandoned island, but after many searches, nothing was ever found. Another theory is that in her fugue state, she assumed a new identity and is alive living somewhere else. Dissociative fugue states can be triggered by natural disasters, so this is a real possibility. One of the most bizarre things about this case is the fact that all 3 of her disappearances happened in the same month, which was September, and all 3 of them involved a body of water. But it's now been 7 years, and Hannah has never once come back for her things. She's never made contact with a single soul ever again, and whatever happened to her that day remains a mystery.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is why you should always lock your doors. 2 teenage girls were working the night shift at a Pizza Hut when they realized it was 11 o'clock, meaning that it was time to close up shop. They turned off the lights, locked the doors, and began to walk outside. But as they approached their car, they realized that there was an old lady sitting in the front passenger seat. One of the girls opened the driver's side door and asked the old woman, "Can I help you?" before getting in. To which she replied, "I just need a ride home." The girls then told her that they needed to go back inside to call their moms and tell them that they'd be late. They immediately ran back inside, locked the doors, and proceeded to call the police, who showed up about 10 minutes later and arrested her. As it turns out, it was actually a 47-year-old man dressed up like an old woman, and the police found drugs and a knife on his body.
I want to talk about this because I think it's important for as much information to be shared as possible, but there is an active serial killer operating in Stockton, California right now. He appears to be targeting Latino men walking alone late at night, and these are the areas that the 5 shootings this year happened in. But then 2 days ago, the Stockton police said 2 shootings last year were also done by the same person. This image is the only image that police have of him, but a woman who was shot last year and survived said that he's about 6 foot tall, was wearing a black mask and black clothing. So please, please, please help get word out about this, especially if you know any Latino men in Stockton, California right now. I'm going to show you the video that this clip is from, and it includes a phone number for any tips that anyone might have.
When the kidnapper made me guess where he kept my daughter, I went for the basement and he said, "Correct," allowing me to see her. But when I found her severed head in there, I learned that every other choice would have been correct as well. I told her there was no monster in my closet, as I picked her up and told her that she could sleep with us tonight. I figured that was the safest way of getting out of the house, without the man realizing that I saw him. All my life, my parents told me not to open the basement door, but I got curious and disobeyed them. What is that glowing ball in the sky? And why does it hurt my eyes?
Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a couple police sketches, and then we're going to see what the people looked like when they were actually caught. And I cover all sorts of true crime and spooky stuff on this page, so make sure you follow along. Starting with this one. So this was a man who SA'd a minor, and this was the description that she gave to the police. And as you can see, this is really close. He has the big glasses that go up over his eyebrows, broad nose, really round face. Even the hairline is pretty similar. This is a woman who stole a baby from a maternity ward. And she was actually caught 10 hours after the sketch was released because she looks almost identical to it. So the witness who gave the description to the police officer for this one was actually intoxicated when he saw her. But that person basically got it identically correct. You can see her wispy bangs, super round face, the way that her hair comes down over the sides of her face. Even her eyebrow shape is perfect. These sketches were all done by a woman named Lois Gibson, who holds the Guinness World Record for most successful police sketch artist. She helped solve over 1,000 crimes in her 30-year career.
This is me after being released after 39 years in prison for a crime I never committed. I am Ricky Jackson, and in 1975 a robbery and murder occurred in a Cleveland store, in which a 13-year-old witness, Eddie Vernon, blamed me and other 2 men for being the protagonists of this act, because he saw us in the area. He told them that I was the one that shot the victim, and unfortunately, they believed him. And at the age of 19, I was sentenced to death. But years later, something was discovered that would free me from this unjust sentence. My death sentence was postponed multiple times until 2014, when Eddie Vernon, who was now 52 years old, finally confessed the truth. He exposed that the police pressured him to give false evidence against me and the other two men to close the case. Thanks to this and other evidence, I was finally released and compensated with $1 million. Do you think that was enough to pay the 39 years?
Huge trigger warning for this video, which is one of the most disgusting UK news cases I think I've ever seen. Mark Whalley is a 71-year-old man from Manchester. At the end of last month, news broke of the horrors he had planned. The National Crime Agency had found Mark used websites to discuss his interest in children under 12 with others. Disgustingly, he'd shared explicit images with others and shared his own plans and wishes to perform hideous acts himself. Now, it was actually a tip-off from Norway that helped to catch this criminal in the act who was planning a hideous attack. Mark had spoken to someone online who claimed to have access to a 12-week-old baby. They agreed for Mark to use this child for his sickening plan. Mark arranged to meet this person at a hotel in Manchester city centre. He entered the hotel and attempted to board the lift. Officers intercepted him as he did so and detained him. He was arrested on suspicion of child abuse offences. Now, originally he had tried to claim that the officers were mistaken and he was simply meeting someone for an affair. He would eventually admit to his hideous crimes and pleaded guilty to making and distributing child P. He also confessed to arranging a child S offence and possession of extreme images. Mark's devices had already been found to have child P on them back in 2021. He's been sentenced to just 80 months in prison.
This TikToker who was a drug queen was just brutally executed in broad daylight. This is Sabrina Duran, who is a notorious drug dealer, narco queen, and TikTok influencer. Earlier this week, she was ambushed by a group of individuals who were covering their face, where they shot her multiple times, leaving her for dead, and then took her car. This is definitely cartel violence, and her death was a repercussion of something that we would probably never know. Sabrina was also released from prison about a month ago, having served a portion of her sentence involving a drug trafficking charge. And I'm guessing she either talked to somebody on the inside or they just didn't trust her anymore. The video of her being executed in broad daylight is going viral, and I'm about to explain it. It opens up with her already laying in the middle of the street, having been shot a couple times, and one of the men is grabbing her things out of her pockets. As he gets back in the car, you see Sabrina moving around like some sort of doll. It seems she can't move some parts of her body because she just got shot, and she's struggling to get up and make contact with these men. This goes on for a couple more seconds, and then the men in the car go in front of her and park it, and one of the men then gets out of the car and shoots Sabrina multiple more times, killing her on the spot. They then get back in the car and just leave her dead body in the middle of the street. This video is absolutely sickening, and I'm just waiting for more information to come out about it because it just happened. Whatever you do, don't go searching for the video because it is pretty disturbing. And hopefully within the next couple of days, there's more information I could cover and make another video about this.
This is Nicola Priest, a TikToker that was convicted of murdering her own 3-year-old daughter. So back in 2020, Nicola was an active TikTok user. She was constantly posting videos with her daughter, just sharing these fun moments in life of her and her daughter giggling, and she frequently posted videos of she and her daughter dancing. Lots of videos just like these. But on August 9th, 2020, this story takes a sharp and disturbing turn. On that day, Nicola and her boyfriend, Callum Redfern, were in their apartment, and 3-year-old Kaylee Jade Priest did not want to go to bed. Nicola and Caleb were really trying to do the dirty deed, if you know what I mean, but Kaylee Jade would not go to sleep. She kept coming into their room, bothering them. And for some reason, the fact that Kaylee Jade would not go to sleep awakened some sort of primal rage within the two of them. So that evening inside of their home, the two of them beat Kaylee Jade to death together. When her body was found, Kaylee had severe abdominal and chest injuries, and according to investigators, she had been assaulted for a prolonged period of time, meaning she suffered before she died. So after the murder, neighbors came forward and claimed that they had seen Nicola abusing her daughter in public. They had seen her slap and punch her, so nobody can assume or even know what was going on behind closed doors that entire time. But what did Nicola do after her daughter's death? Well, she thought she was in the free and clear, and she immediately in the months afterwards started posting tons of TikTok videos, including this one. Yes, this is a real video where she pretends to care about her daughter's death. Eventually, though, after Kaylee's autopsy and some detective work, investigators were able to determine that she wasn't dead from some sort of accident. Her own mother and her boyfriend had killed her. And so the two of them were sentenced to prison terms. Now, the sad thing about this whole story is that Nicola was only sentenced to 15 years in prison. And this was back in 2020, so that means in just 12 years, she'll be out on the streets again in England. I can't fathom how you only get 15 years for murdering your own innocent 3-year-old daughter. It's just beyond me. But yeah, this case just is so sad. It has no happy ending for anybody involved.
This is how two true crime podcast fans helped a man wrongfully imprisoned for murder. It was June 2021, and married couple Harley and Michael Girk were spending many hours travelling in the car. To pass the time on their journeys, they were listening to true crime podcasts. Specifically, they started enjoying the Crime Junkie podcast. It was through this podcast that they actually were introduced to the case of the 1981 murder of Father Patrick Ryan. Father Patrick had been brutally murdered at a motel in Odessa. After listening to the podcast, they found out that a man named James Rios was convicted of the crime, but it was a controversial ruling. The evidence was extremely weak. James was an unemployed hitchhiker at the time of the murder. When the murder actually took place, James, who had befriended the priest, was in New Mexico. Now, James had seen the priest on the night in question, but when the man was murdered, James was out of town. He even had proof of this. He had petrol receipts and even a speeding fine. The killing went unsolved, but a year later, a drunk James, who was feeling extremely guilty for hitching a ride with the priest on the night in question, actually rang police. In his drunken state, he felt he was guilty for the murder for getting a ride with him. In his phone call with police, he confessed to feeling guilty for this. Although he recanted his statement when he sobered up, it was too late. He was convicted and sentenced to 38 years in prison. Luckily, Michael, who was listening to the podcast about this case, just so happened to be the son of the chief of police in Odessa. The couple decided to see how they could help. They got Michael's dad to reread the case file, and he agreed that there was not enough evidence for a conviction. Thanks to advancements in technology, fingerprints from the original crime scene were actually found to be matches of 3 men who had since passed away. No fingerprints of James were found at the scene. Now, James actually had been released from prison in 1995, but still had a murder conviction on his record. Thankfully, due to the two true crime fans, this was about to change. The Innocence Project of Texas got involved, and James was determined to be innocent. He will receive $80,000 in restitution for spending 24 years in prison. He told the press that it was the best day of his life.
This is the tragic and sick case of Gabriel Fernandez, and this is a massive trigger warning.
This is 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez, who was born and raised in Palmdale, California. And he was abused and tortured over a period of months by his own mother and her boyfriend. Gabriel lived with his grandparents until 2012, when his mother, Pearl Fernandez, regained custody of him despite concerns for his well-being from the family. And throughout his 8-month stay in the household of his mother, Pearl, and her boyfriend, he was systematically tortured and abused. The abuse included regular physical beatings causing broken bones. He was also being forced to eat cat litter and feces, his own vomit, and spoiled or expired foods. He was being burned with cigarettes and heated spoons, being shot with BB guns in various areas of his body, including the face and his groin. They also pepper sprayed him, forced him to wear women's clothing, and had him sleep bounded and gagged in a small cupboard. His teeth were also knocked out with a baseball bat. And according to Gabriel's siblings, when Gabriel's mother and her boyfriend were abusing him, they would just laugh about it. Prosecutors said that Gabriel's mother and boyfriend were motivated to abuse him because they believed he was gay. On May 22, 2013, Pearl Fernandez called 911 reporting that her child Gabriel was not breathing. Gabriel was fatally beaten by his mother and her boyfriend after failing to clean up his toys. When first responders arrived, they found him on the ground naked with several injuries. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital where doctors declared him brain dead. He died 2 days later on May 24, 2013 at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. He died at just the young age of 8 years old, and the official autopsy declared he died from blunt force trauma that coincided with neglect and malnutrition. Gabriel's mother was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and her boyfriend was sentenced to death. This is definitely one of the most sickening cases you would ever hear about or read about. I can't imagine the pain and trauma Gabriel Fernandez was going through while being tortured by his mother and her boyfriend. And this was just complete abuse. They were treating Gabriel like he wasn't even human. I wish the mother got the death penalty too, but life in prison is not good either. But rest in peace to Gabriel Fernandez, and this case is absolutely sickening.
This is the murder of James Bulger, one of the most heartbreaking true crime cases ever.
This is James Bulger, and he was a 2-year-old toddler living in Liverpool, England with his parents. And on February 12, 1993, he was abducted from a shopping mall in Bootle, Merseyside. His father briefly let go of his hand while they were at the mall, and John Venables and Robert Thompson, who were both 10 years old at the time, approached James and lured him away. The abduction was caught on security cameras right here, and the footage showed the two boys leading James away. And after abducting James, John Venables and Robert Thompson took him on a harrowing journey through various locations in Liverpool, during which they subjected him to severe physical and emotional abuse. And you won't believe what these two 10-year-olds did to this 2-year-old boy. They took James to train tracks where they threw blue paint into his eyes, kicked him, stomped on him, threw bricks and stones at him. They placed batteries in his mouth and may have inserted them into his anus, although none were found there. They dropped a 22-pound fish plate on his head. They hit him in the head with a metal bar countless times, which caused 10 skull fractures. James Bulger suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be identified as the fatal blow. Thompson and Venables then laid James across the railroad tracks and weighted his head down with rubble, hoping that a train would hit him and his death would be ruled as an accident. After that, they left the scene, and James Bulger's body was then cut in half by the train. James's severed body was discovered by a group of children 2 days later, and the forensics testified that James Bulger died before he was struck by the train. John Venables and Robert Thompson were charged with the abduction, torture, and murder of James Bulger. The case received widespread media attention and was deeply emotional and a controversial trial. The boys were found guilty of the charges, and they were initially sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which allowed them to be held in custody for as long as necessary. They were sent to separate secure juvenile facilities but were eventually released on lifelong parole as young adults. The James Bulger case remains one of the most distressing and tragic true crime stories. Every time I come across this case, it just never sits right with me. I can never understand how these two 10-year-old boys could just take a 2-year-old boy away from his parents and then proceed to brutally torture him and kill him. This case is just sickening, and let me know your thoughts on it.
This shocking case will put you off ever trick-or-treating again. Timothy O'Brien from Texas was just 8 years old on October the 31st, 1974. That evening, to celebrate Halloween, Timothy's dad Ronald took Timothy and his sister Elizabeth out trick-or-treating for the evening. Timothy's mum stayed at home while the trio went out that night. They visited one house, but the occupant didn't open the door. The two excited children ran on ahead to try another door while Ronald stayed behind. He reappeared shortly after and told his children that the owner of the house had opened the door and gave him some sweets. He showed the two children the pixie sticks that he had got from the owner. Once the trio had finished trick-or-treating, Ronald gave 3 other children the sweets in question and 1 each to both of his children. Before bed, Timothy tucked into the sweet that his dad had given him. Worryingly, he started saying that he had a really bad stomach and that the sweet tasted very bitter. The little boy started violently vomiting and convulsing. Tragically, he died on the way to hospital. Understandably, Timothy's death caused concern in the community. Who on earth would poison Halloween sweets? The autopsy revealed that Timothy had consumed a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. Local police started to gather up uneaten sweets from the local area. Luckily, this included the pixie sticks that Ronald had given to the children. It turned out that all 5 of the pixie sticks had been cut open and filled with the substance and resealed. One child even had a very narrow escape when they intended to eat the sweet but couldn't open the top. Police started to become suspicious of Ronald when they discovered that none of the houses that had trick-or-treaters that evening claimed to have given out pixie sticks. Ronald stuck with his story that these pixie sticks were from the house that they'd knocked originally and hadn't answered. He said a short time later, the lights were still off in the house and the door was cracked open just a tiny bit, and a hand reached out and gave him the sweets. Now, the home in question, it was discovered, was actually owned by a professional air traffic controller who provided proof that he was at work at time of the trick-or-treating. Police then discovered that Ronald was in huge debt and his car was about to be repossessed. He'd also suspiciously taken out life insurance policies on his 2 children just months before Timothy's death. Ronald also callously called the life insurance company to make a claim just 1 day after Timothy had died. The nail in the coffin for Ronald was that police proved that he had visited a chemical supply store in Houston to buy cyanide just before Halloween. Ronald was found guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. His wife divorced him, and when she remarried, the new husband adopted Elizabeth. Ronald was given the death sentence and was executed in 1984.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. This TikToker tried to stab and kill her own boyfriend, and she's become an infamous celebrity because of it. So this is Yuka Takeoka. She was born in 1998 in Japan, and there isn't much known about her early life, but eventually she worked her way up to become a manager at a hostess club in Japan. So Yuka seemed to be a completely normal girl. She was working a normal job, but in 2018 she met her future boyfriend, Phoenix Luna. Now, Phoenix was a worker at a different bar and nightclub in Tokyo, and immediately these two seemed to fall deeply in love. They would post TikToks together, and Yuka grew a following here on TikTok. But this story takes a dramatic and disturbing twist. So on May 23rd, 2019, when Phoenix was in the bathroom, Yuka took a look at his cell phone. He had come home 3 hours late that day due to work obligations, and Yuka took that as a sign that he may have been cheating. And when Yuka went through his phone, she found photos of him serving girls at the nightclub, which she interpreted as him cheating on her, when in reality, he was just doing his job. So on that fateful night, Yuka waited until about 3:50 in the morning to ensure that Phoenix was fully asleep. She then walked into the kitchen of their apartment, grabbed the sharpest knife that she could find. She then walked into the bedroom, sat on Phoenix's lap, and pushed the knife as hard as she could into his abdomen. Now, immediately, Phoenix got up screaming. He ran into the hallway, and he was trying to make it to the elevator when he collapsed. Now, Yuka later stated that she became then very sad, and she said that she wanted Phoenix to die, but that she also wanted to die in that moment herself. So she brought his bloody corpse down to the lobby of the apartment building, and the police were called. This led to a very infamous photo that circulated the internet. I can't post it here, but in the photo, Yuka is sitting there on her phone, smoking a cigarette, and she's covered in blood next to Phoenix's body. So Phoenix actually survived the attack, but when social media heard about this, it was set on fire. So people thought that Yuka resembled a real-life yandere, which in anime is a woman who's obsessed with a man, and when she thinks that he's cheating on her or betraying her, she becomes a homicidal maniac obsessed with her lover. And admittedly, that is kind of what happened here. But people have taken this way too far. They are selling shirts with Yuka's photo on it, and there is tons of fan art of that exact picture of her covered in her boyfriend's blood. I mean, there are so many images of this. I cannot believe that people actually sit down, put their pen to paper, and draw this kind of crap. So Phoenix survived, and Yuka was eventually sentenced to a few years in prison for attempted murder. But this once again just goes to show that you can't tell who a person is by their social media. You could be sitting in a bar, posting a funny lip-syncing video, laughing all night, and then later that evening try to stab your boyfriend to death in your apartment.
Bradford's defo the most requested place. You want a case from Bradford, Mush? Here's a case from Bradford. This is Tony Grant, and this is Mohammed Nisar Khan, known as Meggy. In October 2018, 40-year-old Amriz Iqbal was walking along Sanford Road with a friend that's in Bradford Moor. Khan and Grant were driving a Kia Sedona and they just drove straight at Mr. Iqbal and his friend, killing Mr. Iqbal in the process. I couldn't really find the reason as to why this happened. The motive for it seemed to not exist. Mr. Khan was a criminal, is a criminal, as is Mr. Grant, but couldn't really find out why the attack actually happened or whether it was just a random attack on two people in the road. Mr. Khan was jailed for life, or 26 years, and Mr. Grant was jailed for life, or 17 years. Where should I cover next? You bet I won't find any case from Harrogate. Here's a case from Harrogate. This is Daniel Liam Ainsley of Mayfield Grove in Harrogate. On March 5th, 2020, Daniel killed his 48-year-old friend Mark Walsey. Daniel was taken to hospital before the killing to get more medication. He claimed that Mark had stolen his. After leaving the hospital, he went to Asda, bought a set of knives, took one out of the packet and discarded the rest, went back to his bedsit and stabbed and killed Mark. Mark had suffered 37 wounds and Daniel had left the knife sticking out of his chest. November 24th, 2021, Daniel was handed a life sentence with a minimum term to serve of 22 years. He initially pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but the jury changed it to guilty of murder. Where should I cover next?
Some are calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released.